Good morning, dear friends. My name is Igor Yakovenko. It is now 7 hours 42 minutes in Kiev. We have an unscheduled Sunday morning broadcast. It's clear why. I would like to share my thoughts on the fact that, well, I also want to provide information about the major global events that are happening in the world today. This is a military operation against Iran being carried out by Israel and the United States of America. It began yesterday at 9:30 in the morning, Iranian time. The United States of America has named this operation Epic Fury, Israel, Roaring Lion. In a significant development at this moment, the main event is as follows. Yesterday, as a direct result of a coordinated joint airstrike by the military forces of the United States of America and Israel against the Iranian regime, the current supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Khamenei, was successfully targeted and eliminated. Initially, this was announced by Trump and Netanyahu. Tehran initially, he denied the reports of his death, stating firmly that he was not in Tehran at all and that he was safe and sound. Well, just a few hours later, practically today, and in fact very recently, even the state media, and in particular the official state television, has now officially confirmed and acknowledged the news of Khamenei's death. Even though I think most of us watching this right now neither speak nor understand a word of Farsi. Nevertheless, I would like us to take a moment to watch 30 seconds of this broadcast from Iranian state television, and the gravity of the situation will become immediately clear to everyone. Well, to be honest, I think you do not really need a Farsi translator to understand what that person is saying right now. That he, well, at the very least, feels or is showing what he feels. In this case, it doesn't matter. What matters is the result. One of the most significant and pressing questions that existed as of yesterday has finally been resolved. Khamenei has been successfully eliminated from the scene. So, well, moving on from that point, what can we really say? What can be said about this particular situation? This is truly a very important and monumental event in history, primarily because Khomeini was such a powerful and enduring symbol for the movement of the theocratic state. The specific activities he was involved in were seen as representing the primary major threat in the Middle East, first and foremost to Israel, and also to some extent to the United States of America, although there was probably no direct threat to the territory of the US itself. We'll talk about that literally in just a moment. We'll discuss that too because it's important. It's important because it concerns the motives and the world's attitude toward what happened. Well, just a couple of words about that. Who was eliminated? Khamenei ruled Iran for more than 3 decades. He is one of the most odious and hated figures in the world today. One might say that he could be considered a truly great villain, but I don't know who's a bigger villain, Putin or Khamenei. Putin is probably worse. Well, he's the second biggest villain on the planet. Essentially, he was a man who, for a long period of time, Right after those events, the Islamic Revolution in January 1979 began his rise to power. And this calls for an independent conversation about the exact extent to which the political system in Iran, was fundamentally personalist in nature. Most likely, if we include a number of important caveats, you could certainly call it that. But while Vladimir Putin's regime is considered 100% personalist, the Iranian regime is significantly more complex and much more institutionalized. And Ali Khamenei himself, acting as a dictator, you can still talk about him as, well, with a number of specific caveats. As a dictator, he was positioned at the very center of a rather intricate and multifaceted power structure that balances various interests. Highly intricate structure of power centers. Nevertheless, given that he had the unrestricted authority to personally select candidates for government positions and could veto any legislative issue, then it becomes clear that in the final analysis, this is a personalist regime. Why is this important? Because it is important to consider just how much the potential removal of Khamenei from power could affect the central issue, which is the change of the regime. That he was truly a ghoul is evidenced by each of his actions. His well known and significant decisions to have Islamic clerics in 40 countries, transforming mosques into military bases. Consider the famous account of his religious fatwa regarding the British Indian novelist Salman Rushdie, after the controversial author of the Satanic Verses was sentenced to death in absentia by the Iranian leader. At that specific point in time, he wrote those words, and why is it that I know this entire story so incredibly well? It is all very well documented because back in the year 1990, in my own newspaper called Mr. People, I published the full version of the Satanic Verses, and in those pages I also published the complete text of the fatwa, right at the moment when this very significant and historic situation was first starting to unfold before us all. The supreme leader of Iran declared that this unfortunate man, meaning Salman Rushdie, has no other fate but to face death, because he has set himself against over 1 billion Muslims worldwide. Now, a few important words about the specific nature of what the strike itself actually is. In just a bit later, we will talk with you about what the future prospects for this movement are of regime change, but first, let's discuss military potential. What is it truly like in reality? This very formidable and significant military potential, and what it is actually capable of, and what the real underlying goals of the United States of America on the world stage are. One of the main problems in this war right now is that the entire war is being led by a completely foolish and incompetent individual. The fool's last name is Donald Trump, and this perhaps is the single most significant problem in this ongoing war. The vast potential of the government of the United States of America in this region right now is such that, when combined together with Israel's own formidable military potential, they are fully capable of completely overthrowing and changing the current regime entirely. I can say this with an absolute and complete certainty. However, the primary issue we face is that the United States and this incredibly complex military operation, whose goal should be the overthrow of the regime, the theocratic terrorist regime. But the problem is that this entire operation is being orchestrated and led by a fool. What is the potential? What gives me grounds to believe that the Americans, together with the Israelis, can solve this problem? So, as of today, these two carrier strike groups, that's what is known, and what we can say this with confidence. As of today, these two carrier strike groups have more than 1,000 Tomahawk cruise missiles on board. According to military experts and strategic analysts, this significant stockpile is more than enough to handle any potential threats in the region. For 1 or 2 weeks of active combat operations, this is the resource that is capable of eliminating all of Iran's military capabilities. On the official Israeli intelligence high priority target list, the vast majority of senior IRGC military officers from the rank of major and above are included. Moreover, each of these individuals will be specifically targeted by name and address for drone strikes. Mossad knows them all and will attempt to decapitate the corps, eliminating all IRGC officers. The IRGC is the main support, not the army, the IRGC. In addition, Elon Musk has personally ordered the immediate delivery of 6,000 Starlink terminals to Iran, which will make it significantly more possible to establish reliable high-speed internet access there. Specifically, it is planned to launch specialized high-altitude aircraft acting as Wi-Fi relay stations over Iranian territory to provide reliable and high-speed internet access across the region to the internet for the local population. In addition to all of this, it is, more than anything else, Israel's responsibility. Israeli intelligence, they will actively attempt to organize and coordinate armed resistance in Kurdistan and Balochistan. The United States Air Force will provide full support for it. That is to say, according to experts, the Kurds will be and are currently being supported by the Israeli intelligence services, while the Baloch people will rely on the support of Pakistani intelligence with the strategic assistance of the government of the United States of America. So in principle, this means that, the possibility of a change of power in Iran certainly exists. The main problem is that the person who is currently in charge of all this, in his own mind, this goal. And here, in just a very short moment from now, we will talk and think about this together with you. So, what is the general attitude toward this in the international community across the globe at this very moment? After this military operation, this ongoing conflict has lasted for less than a full day. So, let us look at the United States of America. Relations. One of the main problems is that very same fundamental problem of the fool. The current American attitude toward this potential war against Iran is shaped by fears that it will lead to a massive regional escalation. Furthermore, this perspective is influenced by the general public attitude toward Donald Trump, especially since he continues to maintain a significant level of overall support nationwide, which complicates the foreign policy debate, 36% as is known. So accordingly, the logic is roughly as Brodsky once said, if Pushenko is against collective farms, then I'm for them. If Trump were to start a war with Iran, then a substantial number of congressmen, particularly Democrats, and a large part of the American public who hold a negative view of Trump would be automatically against everything he does. Besides that, Donald Trump somehow managed to start this war. After having personally made every possible mistake one could make, he absolutely did not say a single word to Congress. He failed to hold any formal consultations whatsoever with Congress, and he didn't even request permission. He explained his motives extremely vaguely. He lied, saying that he just lied. The claim that Iran is now essentially only a matter of days away from being able to create nuclear weapons is false. There was absolutely nothing of the sort. In fact, the intelligence reports provided by Trump's own administration directly disprove this. Furthermore, Trump claimed that Iran could launch a direct military strike against the mainland United States of America. That's a lie. Iran doesn't have those resources. This lie immediately becomes known, and so the attitude among Americans themselves is, let's say, quite negative. Moreover, the absolute fool who is leading this entire operation, this whole war, If he had only taken all of these actions that he is currently carrying out right now, right at the very start of the month of January, when he was seen actively telling the large group of protesters to seize the local administrative buildings, saying, "Help is already on the way, so please stay strong and keep going." Well, here's the help that arrived. After, well, just count. Today is March 1st, and back at the beginning of January, he made that statement almost 2 months later. You know, it's exactly like a strange situation where someone pours the hot soup first and only then tries to put the bowl underneath. Well, what can I say? How would you characterize a person who offers a hollow promise of assistance only after the theocratic regime has already taken a life? Well, by the most conservative estimates, 35,000 protesters. After that, even the protesters are already disillusioned, and now they're mostly thinking about their own survival. So basically, at the time when everyone was waiting for Trump's support, he didn't provide it. Moreover, he started negotiations with the Iranian authorities, and as of today, the way it's perceived, everything that's happening, Trump simply, after having pulled truly massive military forces to the shores of Iran, he found himself in a difficult situation where he simply had to do something. In other words, his current war against Iran is not actually about solving any serious problems within the country, but above all else, it is a desperate situation where he has trapped himself in this unfortunate predicament. Furthermore, there is the completely idiotic and misguided notion that trade is the main way to end a war. The idiotic term deal, deal, deal. A deal with Iran. What kind of damn deal are we talking about? A deal with Iran? People who speak an entirely different mental language? What sort of meaningful deal can there be with the Iranian leadership? Well, now, that is the kind of motivation at play here. Now, for the actual facts. Very promptly, the market research and data analytics firm YouGov recently carried out an extensive survey among people in the United States. I'm going to present the key findings of this survey now. This specific survey was actually conducted literally right after the very beginning of this conflict. And right here is exactly what the final results of that study showed us. Just give me one quick second while I try to find my detailed notes on this. So then, looking at the data we have gathered here, fewer than one-third of those surveyed support the positions held by both Donald Trump and the State of Israel in this war. Specifically, a mere 14% strongly approve of the start of this conflict, and an additional 20% say they somewhat agree. So, what that means is, as it turns out, it is more than a third, 34%. Furthermore, approximately 35% of the American public are strongly against the idea of attacking Iran, while another 9% are simply against it. So, in fact, a very clear and substantial majority of Americans are still much more against this military action than in favor of it. Additionally, it is worth noting that 22% of those surveyed currently remain completely undecided on the entire issue. So that's the attitude within the United States of America. Again, a lot depends on people's attitude toward Trump. Inside Iran, there are a significant and growing number of video recordings currently showing that in Iran, some people are crying, some are rejoicing. Well, there is actually, well, you can certainly take a moment to analyze it. Social networks, when one Iranian citizen living abroad who strongly opposes military intervention expresses the view that, first of all, of course, the 40 young innocent girls who were killed in Minab, then, well, again, the reliability of this specific fact regarding the deaths of these girls is in question. But nevertheless, if this is indeed true, then of course it will become a very serious and consequential fact. Besides that, While some individuals are celebrating the news, others are openly suggesting that it is the theocratic regime itself that struck the schools, and the tragic deaths of the children in Minab weigh on the conscience of the entire Islamic Republic. The fact that people have no shelters, that the internet is cut off, and phone communication isn't working. And in this specific situation, many people often place the heavy responsibility for the tragic deaths of innocent civilians. In total, the Red Cross officially documented and recorded, at the time when I was still able to follow the Red Cross reports, a total of 201 individual victims in Iran. Well, most likely, of course, there will be many more. So, how exactly did the world react to all of this? It is quite difficult indeed to offer a comment on these statements. I am not even going to read out what Macron said, because it is not quite it, not everything, I would put it that way. Basically, concern security, it's not good. In general, war is bad and peace is good. Well, wonderful, bravo, Emmanuel. The Norwegian foreign minister offered the most direct clarity in his statement. He was firmly opposed. Here's what he said. I'll quote. His name is the current Norwegian Foreign Minister Espen Barth Eide. He is expressing his deep and profound concern that potential military strikes against Iran could trigger a new large-scale war in the Middle East. He formally called for maximum restraint and condemned Israel. Let me explain exactly how he condemned these actions, and I'll tell you the details right now. He stated clearly that while Israel calls this attack a preemptive strike, it does not actually comply with the standards of international law. True preemptive strikes require the documented presence of an immediate, clear, and imminent threat. This is the official and firm position held by the Norwegian foreign minister. I happened to see a comment the other day saying that the European Parliament, the United Kingdom, and Germany all fully supported it as well. I did not find any support. The specific and direct statements coming from the official representatives of these various countries and these international bodies are actually rather vague. That is to say, while they are clearly negative towards Iran, it is difficult to say that there is firm support from nations like Britain and Germany, and also from the European Commission as well as the European Parliament. Probably not. To put it another way, Iran is deeply problematic. War is bad, and in general, let's all just get along. That's basically what leaders of these countries and organizations are saying. NATO, you could say, has become divided over this war. Well, it's clear who's against it. I don't think I need to list them. Russia, of course. Medvedev, once again, so to speak, has woken up. Well, they woke him up. There you go. China, naturally, is against it. Orban, of course, is against it too. And Turkey is partially against it. There you go. So overall, it's more or less clear here who's in favor. Definitely in favor. That's Canada and Australia. Those are probably the two countries where, well, there's just unequivocal support. So the Prime Minister of Australia, here's what he says. It has long been recognized that Iran's nuclear program poses a threat to global peace and security. The international community has made it clear to the Iranian regime that under no circumstances should it be allowed to develop nuclear weapons. And then, specifically, that's Australia. We fully support the actions of the United States aimed at preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and depriving it of the ability to continue threatening international peace and security. The Prime Minister, so unequivocal, unconditional support. Unconditional support from Canada. The Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Cornyn, states that Canada supports the efforts of the United States of America aimed at preventing Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons and not allowing the regime to continue threatening international peace and security. Definitely in favor. Perhaps a third major nation whose head of state has unequivocally expressed support is Ukraine, led by President Volodymyr Zelensky. Well, it's a long text, so I won't read it all out, but the current position is that the Iranian regime has chosen to provide assistance to Vladimir Putin. By assisting Putin, supplying him with Shaheds, it means Iran was delivering them to Russia and others as well. So, in short, unequivocally, there is growing support for the United States strike on Iran. So, in other words, it is absolutely essential that the United States is determined. And whenever America shows that kind of firm determination, international criminal organizations grow significantly weaker. In the preamble and in the announcement, I promise to provide a comprehensive and detailed analysis of how people react, how they have reacted, and how they are reacting today. The members of the Russian opposition, let's call them that, these are the people who stand against the leadership of Putin. Yesterday, I had quite a very interesting and detailed conversation with Alexashenko. It turned out that I was trying to keep this conversation within a specific professional framework of a discussion with an expert. Alexashenko's opinion on economic issues is very important to me. But the discussion ended up being a bit muddled because it was kind of about on virtually every single issue related to the present state of affairs. We had diametrically opposed opinions. I somehow still managed to keep this conversation from sliding into a bitter and harsh confrontation, but nevertheless, Alexashenko's position and Pastukov's position, they are certainly quite different, but still, it's essentially one position. That is that all of this is very bad for, first and foremost, Ukraine. So, well, as for the public condemnation of Trump here, as they say, it's Captain Obvious at work. But the main point, it seems to me, is extremely, extremely debatable. To be perfectly honest with you, I still find myself completely unable to understand the logic behind why strikes against Putin's closest ally and the subsequent weakening of Putin's influence on the global stage is somehow supposed to be a negative development for Ukraine. I truly still don't get the reasoning behind that argument at all. When I tried to provide a specific example from World War II, well, this took place during the summer of 1943, in 1943, when the Allied forces landed their forces on the Apennine Peninsula, a strategic military move which directly led to the overthrow of the fascist leader Benito Mussolini. And as for the sudden exit of Italy from the war, who was Hitler's closest and most important ally in Europe, for some reason my opponent told me that this simply does not matter at all. I still don't get it. So, the clear historical analogy to consider here is that during the height of World War II, the Allied powers were strategically able to successfully knock out and neutralize Hitler's most significant and vital European ally, which was fascist Italy. After that, the situation changed dramatically in favor of the anti-Hitler coalition. It changed dramatically. And the summer of 1943 was, as many historians have noted, a truly radical turning point in World War II. Of course, that includes the monumental Battle of Kursk, but it also encompasses the significant fact that Adolf Hitler lost one of his key allies during this pivotal season. Why? I still fail to fully comprehend why the weakening of Putin's most significant and influential ally is not beneficial for Ukraine. Well, let's look closer. That's already, so to speak, a great mystery. It is what it is. I found Mikhail Ivanovich's opinion to be very important and significant. Krutikins. I really hope that we can eventually. The events are unlikely to conclude in the coming hours. Therefore, I hope to arrange a serious conversation on this topic with Mikhail Ivanovich. So here is what Mikhail Ivanovich Rutikin wrote on his Facebook. I will quote his words. It is very important to understand how significant the trends are toward reviving the ancient traditions of what was once the great Iran. Will the emerging anti-Islamic ideology continue to develop? Just a year ago, the rejection of Islam was being expressed. In slogans of the protesters, we are Aryans, we do not worship the Arabs. And recently, I saw and heard something completely unexpected in a recording from the 40th day memorial ceremony for a young man who died in the town of Nur Abad. The bloodstained shirt of the murdered man became the focal point of such chanting. Then came the chanting itself. This is evidence of a crime. Of Islam, this is a plucked flower. Of Iran. And if, as Krutikin writes, they are accusing not the dictator or his regime of these crimes, but Islam itself directly, then something very radical is happening with the Iranians. End of quote. So this is perhaps the first thing. This is exactly what I'm thinking about. While I am not an Iranologist, nor am I a specialist in the ancient history of Persia, nevertheless, when people speak about the grand 5,000-year history of Persia, they often only take into account the very last chapters of that history. Few centuries, that is, beginning from the historical Arab conquest, nearly 1,400 years ago. The Arab Islamic conquest of Iran took place. Iran, also known as Persia, is such a deeply complex entity and such a multifaceted state that it simply cannot be perceived as being just about the Shiites. Because of this inherent complexity, there will always be a significant center of power there within the world of Islam. This is a very interesting and profound reality to consider. I would say this is a kind of historical Soviet style question because we see that clearly in the deep collective consciousness of the Iranian people. It is important to note that not only among the Kurdish communities and the Baloch people, but also among the Persians and Azerbaijanis, there exists a deeply intricate and multifaceted social structure. We can clearly see that there is an incredibly extensive and significant layer of secular culture. This was a culture that, prior to the events of January 1979, was the dominant force in society, secular culture. That is to say, a person can, just like in Russia, consider themselves, a huge number of people consider themselves Orthodox, who, as it was once written, their attitude toward icons. They're good for praying to, but not good for just covering pots. And those same deeply religious Orthodox believers later knocked the crosses off the churches. So it was the same thing. There was the same kind of superficial orthodoxy, although almost 90% were considered Orthodox. Then 100% were considered atheists, and then suddenly everyone turned out to be Orthodox again. So this is quite a superficial story. How deeply Islam is rooted in the population of Iran is a big question. Yes, it is certainly true that Islam has been the dominant force in the region for almost 14 centuries of history. But at the same time, we can already see that firstly, a vibrant and entirely distinct cultural movement is emerging. This involves the deep-rooted ancient Persian culture, the traditions of Zoroastrianism, and a more general, long-standing secular culture. And what will happen as a result? It's quite difficult to say. Iran's retaliatory strikes. There are some. There were casualties from the strike on Tel Aviv when more than 20 people were injured and a 40-year-old woman was killed. strikes on Middle Eastern countries. In short, everything is just beginning. But I still hope that, despite the fact that all these operations are being led by a fool, nevertheless, the armed forces of the United States of America will be able to crush the military potential of Iran, or at least there won't be heavy casualties. Well, after that, a lot, it seems to me, will depend on Israel, on military intelligence, because if anyone, you can argue as much as you want about whether this operation is beneficial for Ukraine. I think it is beneficial. I think it's a good thing. A lot depends on the outcome. If they manage to change the regime in Iran, then I think everyone will breathe a sigh of relief. And as for the fact that this is a blessing for Israel, I personally have no particular doubts about that.